Way back in 1972 in Toronto, Canada, a small group of people had decided to go ahead with a seance to try and make contact with a deceased gentleman named Philip Aylesford. Philip was born in 1624 in England and he had a very early military career, and at the age of 16 he was knighted. Philip had served in the English Civil War and was very good friends with Charles II, and under his rule he became his own personal spy. When he returned home, he would find love with a lady named Dorothea, but unfortunately, this love was not to last and it quickly turned sour. And it wasn't long before Philip found himself another love interest whilst riding his horse around his estate, with a Romani woman named Margot. And he tried his best to keep the affair a secret, but eventually his wife would find out. Dorothea accused the woman of being a witch and stealing away her husband by means of witchcraft. And Margot was sadly burned at the stake, whilst Philip did nothing to help, as it would have damaged his reputation, and he simply let her burn. Overcome with guilt and sadness, Philip took his own life in 1654 by jumping from the battlements of the castle at the young age of 30. And from that fateful day, it was said that the ghost of Philip mournfully walked the grounds of the castle looking for his lost love. And that is all the group knew about this gentleman from the 1600s, but it was more than enough. The group all sat around the table and placed their fingertips gently upon the surface and proceeded to try and communicate with Philip by means of table tipping. And it wasn't long before the group started to feel the presence of a spirit. The way of communication was simple: one rap for yes and two raps for no. As they asked questions about Philip's life, it would seem that Philip was responding with the right answers. And throughout the seance, the group experienced rapping on the tables, chills in the air, and strange noises. And the table would actually tilt onto one leg and move across the room, and distinct rapping noises seemed to be coming from the wood of the table itself. It would seem that the group had actually made contact with a spirit who lived and died way back in the 1600s, and as far as the group was concerned, the evidence was all there. It was conclusive. They had successfully communicated with a spirit. But you see, there was one small problem with this experiment. You see, the character Philip Aylesford was a pure fabrication. A fictional character. Philip never existed. You see, the whole seance was an experiment, and it was set up to prove that ghost sightings and poltergeist activity are purely created in the mind of the person seeing it, the power of the mind. And this experiment was set up by the Parapsychological Research Society, and the man in charge of the experiment was a mathematical geneticist, a Dr. A. R. George Owen, and it was overseen by psychologist Dr. Joel Witten. And the chosen test group consisted of the following: Owen's wife Iris Owen, former chairperson of Mensa in Canada Margaret Sparrow, industrial designer Andy H., his wife Lorne, heating engineer Al Peacock, accountant Bernice M., bookkeeper Dorothy O'Donnell, and sociology student Sydney K. The rules of the test were simple: to attempt to make contact with the spirit of a man named Philip Aylesford. The only problem was Philip was completely made up. He never existed. He was a total make-believe character, and everyone involved in the seance knew this. The group were all given fake details of Philip Aylesford and told the specific details of his life, including his tragic life, love life, and eventual suicide. And they even sketched out what Philip looked like. And they used all this information to try and create a spirit of a man that never existed. Like I said before, the experiment was to find out if it was possible to bring a person or spirit into existence with just the power of the mind. And so they all focused their imagination into creating this man, and they proceeded with the seance, which at first didn't actually show any results. Of course, as you can imagine, the group actually felt rather silly sat around a table talking to a ghost who didn't exist. They were all rather rational people, and the idea was a radical one. But over the course of the year, one night per week, the group persevered and became more comfortable with the whole thing, trying their best to imagine this man or ghost into existence by use of the imagination and meditation. But still, after very little results, it was decided that the settings of the seance would be changed. The lights were dimmed and it took on the classic atmospheric seance conditions, and things actually started to happen. And at this point, the story of Philip and the image of this man that never existed must have been very vivid in their minds. And it wasn't long before they noticed they were getting results. They started to get responses from beyond, apparently from the fictional spirit of Philip. They asked questions about what they knew about his fictional life, and he always answered correctly. by tipping the table and actually rapping on the wood and also on the walls. And according to the group, a few of the very sturdy tables that they used actually broke at the legs. And they also experimented by placing objects on the table that seemed to stick and not fall when the table was tilted. And now, because of their amazing results, they decided it was time to record their findings for a documentary named Philip the Imaginary Ghost. And it was in this documentary that you actually see the group holding the seance around the table. They all look and sound very excited and in a very joyful mood as they try and communicate with the spirit of Philip. It wasn't long before the table started to move, tilt, and balance on one leg, and the group became very excited and even started to sing cheerful songs to encourage more activity. But nothing prepared the group for what happened next. Philip started to communicate once again by knocking on the table, and the mic that was used for the filming moved in closer and caught it all. There was no doubt that the knocking was in response to their questions: one rap for yes, and two raps for no. It was as though the raps came from inside the actual wood that made the table. They also claimed that the lights also started to flicker, and they swore that they heard strange noises that they couldn't explain and strange vibrations coming from the table. It was almost like Philip was in the room. It would seem that the group had successfully created a spirit that was sentient and responsive. Although most of the group were absolutely convinced that they had created a fake spirit that was only produced by the power of the mind, and this suggested that all encounters with ghosts and poltergeists could be purely created in our own minds, and that we are creating the paranormal conditions ourselves. The experiment was actually met with quite a lot of criticism, and it was believed that the experiment was not conducted under controlled scientific conditions. Now, it is important to remember that if Philip was in fact making contact and if he was sentient, he never actually manifested and they didn't actually see a ghost. Many believe the group were just answering the questions for the spirit. After all, they knew the story in full, so it is possible that the group were willingly providing the correct answers without realizing that they were actually doing it themselves. Maybe they were delusional, a delusion that they all shared. Maybe. Another theory is that the group had entered a childlike state, believing that nothing was impossible, and over the last year that they spent so much time together, they had formed a very special bond that may have helped the parapsychological experiment, and they were not actually successful in creating a spirit, but instead a joint psychological skill. But some people believe that it is very possible that the group actually made contact with a demon who wished to manipulate the whole experiment and simply pretend that it was Philip. But there is one more possibility. What if everyone in the group had contributed enough thought energy that the character of Philip was actually brought to life as a thought form? What if each member of the group had all created their own version of Philip? Did the group create a tulpa, which is a creation of a thought form? Think of it like an imaginary friend, but more complex, with sentience and its own personality. But some people do seriously doubt that the group created anything at all, apart from false results, which were produced by none other than themselves, and there was nothing paranormal about it, let alone anything to do with parapsychology. But what do you think? Do you think that way back in 1972 in Toronto, Canada, a group created a being out of pure thought energy? Do you think it's entirely possible that they could have actually come in contact with an actual demon? Or was the team actually successful in proving that poltergeists and ghost sightings are merely a product of the mind? Or maybe you believe that the experiment was simply void and pointless. As always, I'll let you decide. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other, and I will see you